If there's one thing we can all agree on, it's that humans will believe almost anything. On Blasphemy with Chris and Marnee, we take a look at some of these beliefs, uncover their very human origins, how they've developed and changed over time, and the very real consequences they had in society and culture. Impacts that continue even today in our lives. Welcome to Blasphemy. My name is Chris Setti, and with me, as always, is the beautiful Marnee. How you doing?
I'm good.
Good. So, just right up top, you can find us at blasphemypodcast.com. Check it out. All our episodes get put up there. You can get in contact with us if you want to know about us. There's some information about who we are. But yeah, check that out. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, it'd be awesome if you would rate, review, subscribe, do all that bullshit. That'd be really cool. And of course, you can find us wherever you find podcasts will show up. So tonight, well, maybe I should say another thing. I don't know if you've been watching the news lately, but a lot of bullshit has been brought up, and all of a sudden in the surface and like in the mainstream. If you haven't, go listen to the Adrenochrome episodes. You'll learn some of the things that animate these ideas. And if you are under some kind of illusion that these people actually believe these things, these leaders, senators, representatives actually believe this bullshit, I don't think they fucking do. But they're manipulating you through a bunch of lies and fucking idiot nonsense that all goes back to dark, hateful conspiracies that we're just recycling. So maybe go check those out. We talk about Marjorie Taylor Greene before she was cool.
We did.
Yes. Fuck her. God, she's terrible. Anyway. So today we're going to cover a pervasive, maybe even ubiquitously held belief. One that can have us wind up in a whole variety of crazy situations, holding on to seriously flawed opinions and worldviews, and making decisions we regret later. I'll present this belief with a quote that could be attributed to basically every human around. You, me, everybody, right? And that is, quote, "I'm not biased. I'm totally rational. I consider all the evidence, form accurate, well-informed views and opinions and beliefs."
Yes, I
right?
do. I do.
Of course, we all do, right? We, in general, believe this about ourselves. We don't believe this about other people, of course.
Me smart, you dumb.
Yeah, when it comes to ourselves, we hold a pretty lofty place when it comes to the idea that we are rational creatures. I actually taught some of this stuff in a corporate environment. I would always have them like, hey, who here thinks they're rational? That you like, your opinions are well informed. They're based off of truth. You know, you got your shit together. And all these people raise their hand. And pretty much everybody,
Like,
right? And then I'd be like, who thinks the person to their right's rational? And all of a sudden, some hands dropped immediately because they're dicks. They're just like, I don't even care what people think of me. And then some people looked around while they slowly brought their hand down like, sorry, but I don't believe you're rational. Just me. However, it doesn't take much of that supposed rationality to understand that the idea that I have a clear picture of reality and all that is going on, while they alone are deluded by misinformation and bias, is not really a defendable idea at all. Yet that is precisely the viewpoint we hold for the most part. So we're going to be looking at the idea of human rationality. There's a lot of mythology we believe about ourselves. Even if you're not fucking some religious person, there's a lot of mythology around humans. And again, I think we had a little bit of this discussion in that second Christmas episode when we talked about Göbekli Tepe and how maybe it marked this shift into worshiping ourselves, pulling ourselves out of nature, above nature, different than nature. And so we kind of have this idea that we're special, that, well, yeah, nature operates this way, but humans don't operate like animals at all. They operate like these magical creatures who have this purpose-built consciousness that's tuned into reality and truth, and it's after truth. That's not true fucking at all. Okay. And we're going to talk about that. Now, we're going to do it over 2 episodes. This first episode is going to be about, let's talk about some things we know about our brain, like just that we've discovered, that we've found out, that may present a counter argument to the idea that we're rational by nature, that we're just built to see the world as it is. Mm-hmm. And then next episode, we'll look at some very specific things that we've found out through sociological testing and experimentation, things that we've been able to name, different biases, different cognitive strategies that we've developed. And that will be cool because we're going to not only be very familiar just from our own standpoint, but these things are right now just because of the world we've built and social media and hearing everyone's opinion all the time. These things are like out there for you to just go like, oh, that's that. And so that will be fun because we'll get a look at some of the strategies our brains have put together to fucking help us survive. Okay. And they aren't about, let's find out what's right and true. They're not about that. It's about other things. Let's take a look at some of the things we have learned about the human brain, how it works, and the cognitive strategies that have come together that makes us what we are. What we will see is that these features and functions did not evolve in order to make us more rational, but rather to enable our survival through a myriad of social and motivational processes happening inside of that lump of tissue between our ears. The first thing we need to understand is that our brains, my brain, your magical baby's brain, is not fit for the world we emerge into. We enter life with a serious problem. A brain built for the Pleistocene era, about 32,000 years ago, and then a world that we have completely reimagined. While this may not seem to be a problem to you, this fact is largely the root of much of the stress, anxiety, pain, and conflict that we encounter in our lives.
Yeah.
So, as they've been able to kind of like, examine these ancient remains and fossilize, skeletons and things, we've been able to kind of like track and see changes that have been occurring in not only human, but hominid species, because what we've learned in the last couple hundred years since evolution as a science came on the scene is that we aren't the only humans that have walked this earth, and in fact there were multiple kinds of humans walking the earth at the same time at different periods of time. Mm-hmm. And so there's all kinds of species, and by the way, their DNA is in fucking you. Okay. I did the 23andMe thing, right? Spitting the thing.
Yeah.
I was number 4, not anymore because so many more people have done it, but back then there was like something like, I don't know, like 800,000 people. I was the 4th ranked for Neanderthal DNA. Mm. There is Neanderthal DNA in most European, especially Northern European people with that ancestry. Mm-hmm. If you're over in Asia, there's a lot of Homo erectus, right? DNA. And so what we found is that we aren't the lone humans who have walked this earth. We were not fucking created as some special image of God. We are the product of evolutionary processes, and we weren't the only ones. So we just happen to be the only ones here now.
Yeah.
And people argue over why that happened. You got one camp who love to dwell in shame and guilt and kind of the negative part of the human condition. And they're like, oh, well, clearly we just walked in and slaughtered them all. Probably ate them. We raped them, their dead bodies first. They kind of go real negative with it. The fact that I have Neanderthal DNA in me means we fucked them. Okay? And they lived to have a baby. So, I mean, we need to calm down. I've watched documentaries where these people are like, Homo sapiens are the cancer on the earth. We wiped out the Neanderthal. It's like, okay, calm down. Did that happen? In some cases, maybe, but they probably killed some of us too. Like I think we get real weird. Project. We'll talk about that next episode. The idea of projecting and the fact that that's all we can do. The scientific fact and understanding we have gained through studying the brain has made this clear. In our analysis of our early human ancestors, it was a much different world when our brains came together. Different pressures that led to the development of functions, physiological processes, and cognitive strategies that were beneficial to our survival in that very different world. Mm-hmm. like I said, evolutionary biology and evolutionary psychology, what they've determined is that the brain we have, the brain that every human enters into the world today, came together, kind of solidified, if you want to say, around 32 to 38,000 years ago. Okay. Now, evolution happens over a very long. So, I mean, I know that sounds weird, but what they're saying is, hey, the farthest back we can go that we can surmise so far that people had brains that looked like ours was then. Okay. And then they looked different along our evolutionary development, which we've also been able to study. We certainly don't know everything about that, but we know quite a bit, right? And so that is a base fact that we have to get our minds, our brains around, is the fact that we emerge into this world as aliens. Not because we're outside of nature, but because we built a world that was outside of the nature that existed when these things came together. And they came together based off of these evolutionary processes caused by pressures and environmental changes and all kinds of shit to help us survive. It did not come together to help us seek out truth through burrowing through YouTube videos. Okay? That's my point. Is that everything that we do in this world,
we're not equipped for.
It confuses the fucking world that our brain is actually equipped to deal with. And so a lot of the stress and all the shit where you're like, oh, why am I stressed? I have no reason. I'm fine, but yet there are things happening. We are confused all the goddamn time. Because our brains are not built for this world. Or rather, I should say, we built a world that is outside of our brains, whatever. And we're going to see that we really did.
How did we do that?
Well, because our brain also has these features that allowed us to do that, which is amazing and wonderful.
It allowed us to create something that we can't keep up with?
Yeah, but we are keeping up with it. I think what the problem is, and it's maybe due to a lack of understanding that that's the case.
Oh, right.
You know what I mean? And so we're running around coming up with reasons why this is happening, but it's not the reason at all.
Yeah.
The reason is we need to maybe look at the way we're doing things and, how our brain works.
Yeah.
And you see this all over, right?
Yeah.
From weight loss systems to education systems. Like, how does our brain work? Let's start doing things that way instead of imagining that this is the way it should be and forcing our brain to do something it can't do. And so,
Well, just a question. Isn't that how you evolve your, brain? Like trying to do things it can't do? I don't know.
Well, so evolution is different than, say, like neuroplasticity, like you hear about. Our brain has the ability to change and alter from a cellular standpoint, right? Because of the state of it as an organ and new pathways and things. That's a physiological, anatomical thing happening, right? Evolution is millions of years with random mutations happening, and some of those things end up.
Okay, but I have read that, if you change your neuroplasticity, your brain, say before you have kids, it will change your DNA and the type of brain that you pass on.
Okay. I don't know. I don't know anything about that.
So
I've heard those same things, but I've never looked into them. And when I hear things, my first thing is like, oh, okay, who said this? And who are you?
Don't remember,
and what are you bringing to the table?
It just made me think you should get counseling before you have kids.
Well, that's probably true, even if it's not a DNA thing, right?
But it also made me think of what you're talking about,
because here's the deal.
Our brains can evolve. If we can change something in our brain before we reproduce, and it makes our DNA change, not it's going to be major leaps in evolution.
right.
But minuscule change.
I have gills. I
swam a lot. I believe it. My children will have gills.
They will have gills. 'Cause I'll just keep putting them in the water, keep pushing them in the water, holding them underwater, doing whatever I can to keep them wet, and they're going to grow gills. Evolution. Yeah, here's the deal, even with that DNA thing. Okay, say you change your DNA through neuroplasticity and all this stuff, and then you put one in your wife. There's all kinds of DNA in there. What? There's genes. There's a bunch of genes.
Oh.
It's not, you don't get to choose, well, the good brain gene ended up in my kid. It could be a fucking idiot. Because you have a whole bunch of genes. There's dominance. There's, there's all of these things that,
So it's not worth it to get counseling before you have kids.
I'm not saying that. It is absolutely is, because kids are going to drive you nuts, and you better get your shit together. I'm saying, if you think you're going to build some super baby by getting your shit together, that doesn't happen. Have you looked around? There's plenty of people that are smart, accomplished, amazing, and their kids are usually embarrassments, in jail, dropping the N-word, on some club or some bullshit. So, I think a lot of that stuff is wishful thinking and pseudoscience, but
I don't remember the study.
Yeah. And we'll next episode
unlike
we'll talk
you,
about this whole idea of studies. We see a lot of studies, and I'm going to talk about what some of those studies really are. Because if you notice, the studies tell you chocolate is great for you. Chocolate is killing you.
I like
Drink
chocolate.
wine. It's good for your heart.
I like wine.
Every sip of alcohol is taking seconds off your life. Do this,
alcohol.
do that. Studies show. We're going to talk about what generates that whole thing and why our brains lock into that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Eat chocolate and drink wine, and don't fucking listen to Facebook. Oh, man. Now, there are some features of our brain that make us somewhat unique in the animal world. Don't read that as more powerful or better.
Yeah.
There are plenty of brains out there that can do much more amazing things than the human brain. We need to understand that too.
Yeah.
I think because our brains have, and we'll talk a little bit this week and next week about why this is, or why they think this is, but because of the way that our brains have evolved, everyone all these animals kind of specialize. We're no different. We just happen to specialize in this very social, imaginative, collective way.
I have actually never heard it said that way, specializing. So that is interesting, because people will be like, whales do blah, 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 and dolphins do da, 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 and they're better than us. But actually they specialize in something that we can't do, but we also specialize in things that they can't do. So
that's an overcorrection that's driven by the same shame and guilt of what, so they're the same people as like, well, humans came in and raped and killed all the Neanderthals. Well, dolphins are better and they should be running the earth. Well, shut the fuck up. We're all animals in nature, right? And when we can get that, and we're not lower than them or worse than them, and we're not better than them or smarter than them. In fact, we just don't even understand how they operate, so they could be fucking way smarter than us. Who knows, right?
Look at those idiots making a stressful life for themselves. We're fucking swimming in the ocean.
I know they're like, watch this. If I just go, they throw me a fish. I don't have to do shit. I got these fuckers trained. Watch, I'll do a flip. They'll blow their goddamn minds. They'll just lose it.
They're like, look where I live. I don't fucking pay millions for a beach house. I fucking live here.
They're like lakefront property or whatever. Oceanfront property. A fucking ocean, bitch. Okay, so anyway, we need to understand that there are some things that make our brain different, unique, you could say, but that doesn't mean more special, smarter, better.
Yeah.
Okay. However, there is a particular feature that does set us apart. It involves an area called the neofrontal cortex, and you have probably heard of it as that thing that makes us, quote, human. It actually isn't unique to us. Many other mammals have this component in their brains. It also isn't that ours is particularly large in size. Other creatures, such as cetaceans, whales, dolphins, those things that you were talking about, have neofrontal cortices that are way larger than ours by volume. They're fucking huge. Yeah. Their brains are huge.
Well, their whole
shit is huge.
Is
right.
Bigger. It should be. That's what I was going to say. Like, is its prefrontal cortex?
Neofrontal cortex.
Sorry. Isn't prefrontal something?
Well, there's one anatomically. The neofrontal cortex is it's called that because it's the latest part of the mammalian brain to emerge.
Okay, so the whales have it, and it's bigger, right?
All mammals have it.
Okay, but I want to ask, is it proportionately bigger?
See, that's a great question. We're going to get to that. You're way ahead of me. Look at you go.
Got the
Everyone hear that. The thing that makes this feature particularly unique in humans is its size in relation to the rest of the brain. Just like you said, humans are at the top of the list when you work out that ratio.
Okay.
So when it comes to our brain, it's not the biggest, but compared to the rest of our brain, it's quite large in relation.
Right.
So while whales have big ones, the rest of the brain is giant, and it's kind of smaller in comparison when you work out that ratio.
Okay.
We'll get to what science thinks is the impact of this unique brain feature, but let's consider our brains a little more, taking a look at what has been discovered about its development. A good visual model to use when talking about the human brain comes from a neuroscientist named Paul MacLean back in the 1960s. Now, since then, research in fields such as neuroscience, paleontology, and evolutionary biology has gained a lot of insight into how much more vastly complex the natural world is when it comes to behavior and brain evolution. So this is not considered an accurate picture of how things developed anatomically or some linear timeline that it implies. Just like everything, the more we have looked, the more complexity and variation we have found. Always, right? Mm-hmm. We always want to be like, oh, this is happening. And we look like, there's like 4 million things happening. You know, like everything is more complex. Everything, it makes, obviously. But again, we think, well, I'm created in the image of God. I just snapped his fingers and I came to be. You know, like, even if we don't believe that, for some reason that's embedded in our idea that we somehow came out of nothing instead of this complex billions of years of shit happening. Yeah. Of course, it's more complex and varied than we would ever. Nothing happens according to the way that we want to, like, chop it up into little bits and, you know, categorize it and compartmentalize it. While this isn't a way to scientifically understand or describe the development of our brains from an anatomical or physiological standpoint, it does provide a conceptual model that is still used as an introduction into the human brain. The model MacLean presented is known as the triune brain model and became popularized through figures such as Carl Sagan in the 1970s. It divides the brain into 3 regions corresponding to periods of evolutionary development.
I've heard of that.
Most people have. And if you're like, triune brain theory, I've never heard of that. Have you ever heard someone say the lizard brain or the monkey brain? Okay, so those are colloquialisms that MacLean never used those words. Those were spiritual teachers and New Age philosophers who came up with that. But MacLean, he termed these regions as, the first one was the reptilian complex.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
This is the part that they say the lizard brain. This is the oldest and most archaic part of our brain systems. The second was the paleo-mammalian complex. That's what typically is called the monkey brain. The rise of mammals and social behaviors, right? The kind of parts of us that had to evolve as those things arose, right? Because, as the dinosaurs become extinct because of environmental changes, probably because of a huge meteorite impact, a lot of these little creatures that could feed off of the little things that were left flourished, and the world that emerged after was kind of the age of mammals. All of a sudden, mammals took over because the environment could no longer support these giant, kind of. And so, along with that, then millions of years of evolution unfold where different kind of thing is happening, right? And so that's the paleo-mammalian complex, right? And there's 3. It's triune, right? So the third one is the neo-mammalian complex. That's what we typically would be called the human brain. But as we've seen, it's not only in humans, right?
Right.
But the neo-mammalian complex, this is the latest development in the brain, primarily happening in humans, right? There are really only a few basic and conceptual takeaways that we can glean from this model today, though, since it has largely been abandoned by most brain researchers. They don't teach this in, like, neuroscience school, right? It was groundbreaking, and it did enable a lot of research, and there are some things that we can take away, and they still use it as an introduction into understanding some things about the brain. But then it's not like a model for, like, how the brain, it's not like your brain starts on the inside with the reptilian part, and then there's a little outside ring that's, an inner ring that's mammals in the out. It's not like that. There's shit happening all over the brain as evolution is unfolding. It's way more complex than just like all of a sudden, bloop, this part shows up. It was fucking obviously not like that, right? And so it's very simplified, but because it's very simplified, it allows us to learn some things, that concepts about the brain, maybe you could say, right? And not so much, this is how our brain is.
Yeah.
So the first is the division of functions that are distributed across these conceptual components. There is agreement for the most part when it comes to the logical categorization of these ideas. The reptilian complex, the lizard brain or whatever, was presented as the features that support autonomic functions such as breathing, heartbeat, fight or flight, the drive to procreate, and other systems that occur below our consciousness. Instinctual, natural programs running in the brain were highlighted in this section of the model. These were deemed the most primitive, earliest evolutionary developments, making life even possible, right? And obviously, logically, it makes sense that the first things to evolve would be like your heart beating without you having to think about it. Because as soon as someone had to think about your heartbeat, you're gonna fucking die. Nothing's gonna live. And so, breathing, that drive to procreate, that thing that makes you want to pass your genes on, not deciding to.
Yeah.
And so, all of these kind of like very ancient, archaic, early life kind of systems that had to come together to make any kind of living organism work, right? And so, I mean, you can glean from this model that, yeah, that's true. There are parts of our brain that we inherited from the earliest development of brains, life, all that stuff, and they do operate those parts in our bodies. Now, they don't do it in these very specific parts, like in this region or that, that's all over the place and kind of different things involved. But that's the reptilian complex, right? The paleomammalian part of the brain encapsulates social and nurturing functions. Social processes that tie groups together, bond families, and establish hierarchies. It also allows for emotional feeling around reproduction, nurturing, feeding, and the rearing of young over long periods of time. It also encapsulates parental behavior. This was theorized to coincide with the rise of mammals in the New World that rose out of the disaster that wiped out the dinosaurs. And so, mammals have different ways of doing things for the most part, and there are variations and exceptions and all of that. But you notice how we have young that we don't lay eggs and then like, see ya, kind of like a lot of reptiles. We don't even, do a lot of things that birds do. Mammals kind of operate different. We feed our young, and that created this bond, this need for us to nurture because they were going to take a long time to develop, like these evolutionary things that had to happen to allow for the life that is around now, kind of stuff. And so that was the paleomammalian brain. We have structures in our brains that govern these processes. And as we'll see here in a little bit, that these also operate in a place that isn't where we can think, or, words can't be wrapped around this because they exist in parts of our brains that don't do that, right? And so it's the paleomammalian, the kind of the stuff that governs a lot of the social shit and the parental and family bonding and all that kind of stuff. It's why not only are we driven to procreate, but there's something we feel about that too. That's a different development that happened in evolution. And this, in the model, this category kind of would encapsulate those processes. And then the last one is the neomammalian brain. It's responsible for things that we would call human, though many other animals have these same abilities. Things like planning, critical thought, creativity, complex social behaviors, organization, and other ideas we probably, in arrogance, call human, right? I mean, you said, how did we build a world that we're not fit for? It's because of this thing. And because it's so big in that ratio, right? It has enabled us to do some interesting things. It has not enabled us to be smarter, right? That's not what it did. It enabled something else that we're going to get to.
All those things you listed are like everything I've been trying to engage while I'm trying to work on my business. Ugh.
Yeah, it's tough.
Organizing. Ugh.
Planning.
Ugh.
So the model can be useful in helping to understand the logical development of behaviors and functions in line with evolutionary history. However, it is in no way as cut and dry as the model lays out, like everything we try to conceptualize. For instance, birds and reptiles have brain features that appear to be scaled down analogs to the neofrontal cortex and by no means can be generalized into some archetypal or instinctual set of behaviors. There is a broad array of behaviors, mating rituals, parenting, social organizations, conceptual thinking, advanced language skills, with even species of birds that have been observed making and using tools. And so, like, these things that we think are so distinct to us, or maybe higher mammals or primates or some shit like that, what we find the more we look is there is shit out there happening that goes against that kind of thinking. We just remember we watched that documentary on the world's most intelligent animals. Okay, first of all, you should all go watch this because if you watch Planet of the Apes, it opens with basically that in real life. They're like this center, and it's this white stone building, and it's like Center for Primate Intelligence or something. It totally, and then you go in, they're fucking training these goddamn apes to do things. We need to stop this, by the way. We're protesting the wrong things because those movies are going to come true. They're training these fucking chimps and shit, and they had this one chimp, and they could put numbers on a screen in a random kind of grid, and that motherfucker could see that thing for a half second, and then just like, perfectly put them in order where they were
on the screen after it like flashed on there, like,
and then they would go. Yes. They've taken the smartest mathematic minds that we have on this planet, and they can't even get through 4 rounds in this. They said it could get to like 27 rounds is how fast it could. We need to stop this. And my point is, there's animals out there that they're smart. Okay, we need to understand.
But they specialize in that, right? But how does that help them in the world?
No, I don't know. Well, pattern recognition helps them in the world, and this is just a pattern.
I know, but we're marveling at how fast it's done. How does that help them in the world?
Well, what we're going to find is our brains do this same kind of things. While we may not be doing it as fast as them, we have other things that allow us to do other things. We can't do everything, right?
My point is
they can't form words with their...
I know that. My point is we marvel at how fast they could do it. What I'm saying is, what value is that? I can point out numbers really fast.
I can't answer that question other than it obviously being able to find patterns in nature for dangers, food, shelter, family.
Okay.
Being able to quickly go, okay, I know my way home.
Never mind. I get it. Now I'm totally clicking on it because when I was
its whole life.
Hold on, when I was training in hypnotherapy and all of that stuff, we learned our brain picks up so many bits of information that we don't even consciously know. So that's kind of what that is happening there.
Think about,
but that's the thing is, so we can pick up all these bits of information we don't consciously know, but the chimps could regurgitate the info that they picked up.
We're going to talk about that in a little bit, but it's probably, look, if you're racing through the fucking trees through a jungle,
you need to see it all
better
really
be
quick.
able to quickly identify which way you need to go, where's a dead end, which way is home, which way is
safety. We could do that, we could raise speed limits and get places faster.
That's a good point. If we could all just we're all just speeding around. We're fucking idiots, but we're really good at making those red lights. Mm-hmm. So let's see. Probably the most valuable contribution of McLean's model is his identification of what is referred to as the limbic system. So he's the guy that coined this phrase and identified these functions based off his theorizing around this model. And while this model isn't considered accurate from a neuroscientific, anatomical kind of standpoint or physiological, he did contribute something in the sense that these functions, called the limbic system, right? What he called the limbic system, they operate within the paleomammalian brain and they govern emotion, social bonding, learning, long-term memory, parental behavior, mating connections, family structures, and shit like that, right? So the limbic system, we have one.
Yeah.
It's now considered absolutely settled science that we have it. The most important thing to get, though, for our discussion is that the limbic system and its associated functions does not have any concept of language, words, or thinking in the way we would frame it as humans.
Yeah.
We don't actually think about any of these things in real time. They are happening below our conscious awareness, and as we will see, the thinking part comes along after the fact, based on a fucking tiny bit of objective information. In other words, this is not the realm of rational thought or concepts, but rather subconscious features that are then informing our actions and reasoning. And by the way, the vast majority of what determines our thinking, opinions, beliefs. Largely what happens is this shit underneath.
Yeah.
And then we're like, well, I got to come up with a reason why this is going on or why I'm doing this. Yeah. But the limbic system is not a place where we can reason or like use rationality to like work things out.
Yeah.
It operates way below. And it operates, these parts of our brain operate very, very quickly, as we'll see. And the parts of our brain that we call human, that conscious awareness that we have, happens very, very, very slowly. And so we're always catching up to our limbic system, or not even catching up. We're way behind it, just slapping labels on shit that's happening, basically.
Well, that's exactly what I learned in hypnotherapy training. Your mind is 90% that what you're describing, limbic system, and 10% conscious awareness.
Yeah, right.
And it's exactly.
But we're humans going, I see the world as it is.
And it's making, exactly what you're saying. It's making all these conscious decisions that are being fed by so much information that we aren't even aware of.
Oh, yeah. Almost everything we are and think is fed by these things that are happening that we don't, that are dark. They're behind a veil that we don't even know. And there's shit we've gathered our whole lives, things we don't even know.
Yeah, they said
came in.
So because it was like you take in all these bits of information that you can't consciously be aware of, and so we pick like it's like between millions of bits to like you can consciously be aware of like some hundreds. I can't remember the numbers.
We'll talk about this in a second. It's worse than that, but yeah.
And so deciding which ones you remember is based on programming, filters, and
trauma.
Yeah, all these things.
Experience.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah. So exactly.
So a final note on what we can take from the triune brain model is the fact that our brains are not built from scratch. We did not appear through magic with the brain we have. We are the product of eons and eons and eons of evolutionary development. Paths that forked off in different directions with different variations, leading back to common ancestors with certain sets of anatomical and physiological features. The brains on this planet today are built upon the brains of our planet's ancient evolutionary past. Brains built upon brains, built upon brains. Adapting and changing through complex processes over millions and millions of years. Our brains are the product of that too. And we have to understand that, because I think we almost worship the human brain, and we're going to find out the human brain is the last thing that we should be trusting in, right? Just it by nature, you know, like what's coming out.
It's something we should need to understand so that we can function properly.
Absolutely. And awareness of how it works so that we can go like, I know that I'm not always right because I'm susceptible to all these things because my brain works the same way that everybody
And it's been
does.
just recent history that we started studying the brain.
That's the problem is we're this will be
I mean,
different.
it's amazing that we know as much as we
Yeah.
know in this time period, because it really has not been a long time since we've started really studying the brain.
I know. You think about the textbooks they're using in, like, say, some high school in middle America. It's going to take a while before we start getting even stuff we found out 10 years ago about anything into those fucking textbooks. That's what sucks, right? But, man, if you want to know what's the latest on your conspiracy theory, you can know it right now.
Well, don't you
That's
think,
sad.
I would think not far off that textbooks are going to be updated through technology.
Oh, they're updated, but they're not going to be bought and distributed, and that takes money and fucking policy and
but
fucking.
the information is, I don't know. I just think I think something can click and happen.
Yeah, they can, and then there's crazy education boards full of Christians who will say that this is Satan trying to steal your godlike nature from you or some bullshit, and then we'll just keep perpetuating the problems we've been doing. Yay. Our human brain is the product of this. It isn't magic. It isn't perfect. It certainly is not built to find or know the truth. It developed in line with what was needed for our continued survival and reproduction, passing our genes on to the next generation. That's why it exists. That's why it came together. That's why every brain came together.
Yeah.
The sole purpose of our brain is to keep us alive,
Right.
keep us keeping alive until we can find something to fuck.
New brains.
And pass our genes on, and then you could fucking die. Who cares? Right? I mean, that's life, right? That's at this basic, most, kind of level. And that's why our brains came together the way it did. You're like, no, it came together so we could build these amazing cities. That's a consequence of the way our brains came together. But really, every brain on this planet exists for one thing: keep you alive and keep you reproducing. Which we're doing a pretty good job of. Right?
Yep.
I mean,
we're doing it.
Fucking what?
We're doing it.
7 point something billion people on this planet. We made 4.
We made 4.
We like doubled our fucking.
No, it's not.
No, I know, but I'm saying the two of us, we made 4. We doubled our numbers in our family. I understand the whole theory of how you have to have this many kids to replace. It isn't even as special as we believe it to be. There are other creatures out there that might as well have superpowers compared to our abilities to calculate, adapt, hunt, outsmart, or determine patterns. Have you ever heard of the pistol shrimp? Have you ever heard of this thing?
Sounds familiar. You probably told me about it before.
This is a fucking little tiny thing, right? And I just want to explain that there are things out there that we write comic books about them, right? About these abilities and give them to people as like they're special and super. There are things out there that might as well have the ability. So the pistol shrimp's interesting. Like if you've ever watched a documentary about the ocean, or they usually highlight this shrimp or the mantis shrimp. There's a few shrimps. They're very vulnerable shrimps, right? And so their kind of evolutionary track took a different route. Rather than develop like a hard armor like a fucking lobster or crab or some shit, they kind of developed more like offensive weapons, right? Like hit first and then you don't get hit, kind of thing. So the pistol shrimp is this interesting creature that has a brain that allows it to do something insane, right? So it's under the water, and it has 2 claws. One claw is a little tiny one, and it's a pincher claw, and it uses that to like rip open its prey to feed itself, right? To pull pieces off. The other one is this weird shaped, larger one, and it actually only moves on the top half. The bottom half remains, rather than the pincher that opens.
Like a lobster.
Most lobsters can open both claws, right? Oh. So this one literally is stationary. The bottom one is hard. There's no way to move it. And the other one has this complex set of muscles and this neurological system that its brain controls that puts such tension on this little fucking claw. This is a little shrimp, okay? So you have to understand this is a tiny thing in the ocean, right?
Okay.
But when it pulls that claw back and it builds this tension, has another set of muscles that its brain can fire in like a fucking nanosecond, and its claw snaps shut, and it's shaped in this way that's like a plunger that goes into the bottom of the claw, right? And when it does that, it causes such a change in pressure. Now, again, it's small.
Wait, it's the little claws going into the big claw? Is that what you're saying?
No, the top of the claw is going to the bottom of the claw. His big claw, his snapping claw. So he's got a pincher claw to eat with, and he's got a snapping claw to snap with.
Okay, so you're talking about a snapping claw.
So when he snaps his snapping claw, the top part of the claw, the movable part, goes into the stationary part of the claw in like a plunger. They fit together.
Okay.
And it creates this high pressure that then collapses. And it's called cavitation is what happens when that happens. And it literally creates almost like a mini fucking sonic boom underwater to where it will kill or knock out fish in front of it or like that. It's so powerful. Not only that, when it does that, so when it snaps its claw and it creates this cavitation bubble, it creates a flash of light that burns at 8,000 degrees. That's the surface of the fucking sun. It does it underwater. This little crab. Okay, that's just one little fucking thing. They literally will snap and do this constantly. They'll even bore holes into rocks to make little things. They can go. Can you imagine going up to a rock face as a human? Clap your fucking hands together. It makes an 8,000 degree ball of energy that busts open rock that you can carve a fucking cave out of. They do that underwater.
What's it called?
It's called a pistol crab.
A pistol crab.
Yeah, it's part of a family of crabs, and this one has this particular thing. Not a pistol crab, pistol shrimp. Sorry.
Shrimp.
It's a fucking shrimp. But see, they're very vulnerable, right? They didn't evolve in ways to fight their prey. That's the last thing they're going to lose, right?
Yeah.
So they're like, bam! And they fucking just knock your ass out, drag you into a hole, and eat you. Hopefully, you're dead, but possibly unconscious, going, ah! You know? What I'm saying is, there are brains
weird.
out there.
How does that evolve? That's so weird.
Millions, billions. First of all, that thing has probably been the same for fucking hundreds of millions of years, living in balance, you know, in their environment. We're this upstart creature that's wreaking havoc over the earth. But yeah. So my point with that is like, it's just fucking like, you know, it's just speaking of shrimp. I mean, if we want to talk about that, the mantis shrimp, another one that you see often in nature documentaries. Their eyes can see every fucking color in the visible light spectrum. They can see infrared. They can see every every color in the ultraviolet band. They see every fucking color that exists. And I mean, we might as well be fucking blind compared to that when you think about how much we can't see compared to what we have evolved to see. So the idea that we have these amazing, perfect brains, right? It's like, well, we fucking don't, right? We can talk, which is, you know, annoying, but but we're awesome at it. My point is the idea that our brains are more amazing or powerful than the brains of other animals is not in line with reality and scientific understanding at all. Our brains are as unique as any other brain out there. Pretty bad at a lot of things other brains out there do, almost with unbelievable efficiency. Like going back to that ape. Our brains can't do what he can do.
Yeah.
Now he can't do a lot of things we can do.
Yeah.
And so we need to get ourselves in the sense that we are part of this whole thing happening.
Yeah.
You know, you want an argument for that we should do stuff to benefit the environment? It's us. Like we need to. The whole argument against any kind of environmental stuff is largely driven by this idea that we're separate from it, that we are in control of it, that we have some power, like we're gods in this. And it's like, no, we're no different than them. Yeah, we just have we have evolved brains that allow us to think we're different than them. That's the problem.
What evolutionary advantage would it be to imagine that kind of bullshit?
Well, we'll talk about that.
Oh, good.
I mean, we're here because of it. I mean, that's just flat out. That's why we're here.
Because of the...
I mean, a few things, but yeah, totally. Okay. So now would be a good time to talk about what having the neofrontal cortex ratio we have affords us. Based off of scientific research, experimentation, and studies, it appears that it allows us to do something very powerful, actually. Just a perfect segue, by the way. Because of this feature, humans are able to maintain the largest flexible social hierarchy on the planet. Sounds fucking impressive, right? It's got to be millions. I mean, look at us. The number of social connections that we can maintain based upon the uniqueness of our brain, 150. Okay. And you're like, 150? It's bullshit. There's, you know, whatever. I know what you're thinking. There are fucking tons of animals that gather, swim, swarm, and flock in the thousands, millions, even billions. 150 seems pretty goddamn weak. But our powers are not about the number, but rather that flexible part. Okay? 1 out of every 4 creatures on this earth is estimated to be an ant. That's how many fucking ants there are. That if you take all the things living on this earth, 1 out of every 4 of them, 25%, fucking ants. We grew up in Southern California. My mom was like, if you leave a goddamn crumb on the fucking counter, because back there, dude, if you left food out at all, I don't care what it was.
We learned that in our first apartment.
Millions of fucking ants. Jesus Christ. Some of them live in super colonies that stretch for miles and miles and contain trillions of ants, all working as a superorganism to maintain the colony. We've all watched as giant blobs of birds morph and move across the sky in unison, made up of countless individual birds, way more than 150. This is all true. There are way, way bigger social groups out there than our brains can deal with. However, they are organized and structured very, very differently. Ants don't exist in flexible societies. They are hatched to a specialized role and task, with changes in the colony only happening rarely and only under extreme pressures, which only serves to trigger a massive, coordinated, frantic effort to bring the strict hierarchy back into order, right? You're not hatched and you're like a soldier ant and you're like, oh, you know what? Fuck this. I feel like a queen.
I'm a queen.
So I'm going to like work and do the stuff you need to do. I'm going to do the auditions. I'm going to fail, but I'm going to pick myself back up. And eventually I'm going to find myself queen.
Reach higher.
It doesn't happen in ant society.
Yeah.
It is a strict, rigid hierarchy.
Okay, yeah.
Humans, and they think this is because of that weird feature that our neofrontal cortex is so large in comparison to the rest of our brain compared to, other creatures, we can maintain flexible societies of 150. If you took 150 chimpanzees and put them in an enclosure, they would murder each other until there was about 30 of them. Their brains cannot organize that. Okay. Our brains allow us to do something there is no other creature on this planet that can have a flexible hierarchy that large. They're very small. Most creatures evolved large numbers in very strict hierarchies because that helped in their survival. We went the other way. Okay. The thing is, when it comes to us, the hierarchy is always shifting, always changing, always adapting to best meet the needs of the group in the moment. This inherent flexibility, the ability to rearrange the hierarchy according to specific needs, taking advantage of the specializations and skills that have developed in people, is pretty significant. No other animal can maintain such a large group with that type of social structure, and it is this very strange evolutionary development that has allowed us to build the world we have built and continue to change. Not because we are so smart or more intelligent than other creatures, but due to our unique ability to work in large groups to accomplish goals, tapping into the talents and skills of individuals for the good of the whole. We developed a social structure because our brains allowed us to do this, to where we go hunting and it's not the chief in charge who's the best tracker, who's the best hunter, who's going to get us the best chance of success. We experience this in our daily lives in the fact that we move between social groups and we perform different roles in those groups.
That's what we were talking about in the Alpha Male episode.
Exactly.
That no one's an alpha in every situation.
Never. And in fact, if that was the case, we wouldn't have made it here. This is not the world we would have ended up with. This ability for us to go, I'm ceding charge to you because you have more skill, more knowledge, more whatever around this, is what enabled us to build this world, period.
Yeah.
Right? And, the fact that we can only, our brains are really equipped to only deal with groups of 150 also is important, because then we understand why we're so confused all the time too, right? While considering this amazing talent, we also become starkly aware of the dilemma we are faced with. We have brains developed to exist in clans and tribes of about 150 people, but find ourselves in a sea of thousands, millions, and billions. Is it any wonder why we are so confused and stressed all the time? So with that in mind, let's look at some things we have found out about how we actually think, though. First, let's consider some very strange things about how we process information in our brains. After the information age hit, we began looking inside of the human body to see if we could understand more of how we work based on the measurement of information flowing in our brain. It's like, we knew that we were this system, and as we're computing computers, we saw some similarities. The human brain is not a computer. It does computing. That's kind of a simplified thing that you've heard people say, it's just a big computer. It's not, right? But there is things happening in us, right, that we went, hey, maybe we can look inside and apply some of this knowledge of information rates and things like that. Let's see what our brain is capable of, kind of stuff. Let's see how amazing we are, probably is what they're thinking, right? It was known that our nervous system is essentially an electrical processing network. Maybe we could figure out some shit by looking at it from that perspective. What was discovered brought up only more questions and cast a huge shadow over the idea that humans are rational creatures dealing with a full picture of reality right now. What they found through experimentation and tests was that our subconscious brain, that part below our awareness and devoid of any kind of thinking or language, takes in information from our various inputs, like eyes, ears, nose, skin, taste buds, at a rate of about 11 million bits per second.
Yes.
11 megabits per second.
Yeah.
Okay. It then sends information to the conscious mind. The problem is our conscious mind is not capable of dealing with this fire hose of information, so things need to be scaled down to a level it can deal with. The rate of information that is able to be sent to this human part of our brain, 50 bits per second. 11 million coming in, only 50 are able to be processed by our conscious thinking. Basically, almost everything going on is never even processed by our awareness or our thinking mind.
Which is
right.
which is where I define everyone's like psychic, intuition, blah, blah, blah. All of that is working in that realm to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Connecting with that stuff.
yeah.
It's not magical out there. It's you were taking in more bits than you absolutely could ever grasp.
Right.
And some people can relax and reach into those bits.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think we attached a lot of magic to these parts of us, this mysterious way that we work. To where, how could I know this? Well, you've been picking up signals that you weren't even aware of, and then all of a sudden triggered something, and it's pulling this.
And their conscious brain goes, "There's no way I could have known that.
I could have known that."
But you had information come into your brain that you had no idea when, where, how it came in, and so you actually did know it.
Yeah, it's crazy. Think about it this way. Let's just simplify this and say your brain takes a picture of the world around it every second, right? It's not, but let's just say let's just compress this 11 megabit thing, right? Into every second your brain's taking a picture. Taking 11 megabits and breaking it megabits per second and breaking it down into bytes, that would be about a 1.4 megabyte picture every second, right? That's like what you text people. A 1.4 megabyte picture. It's pretty standard. From that picture, your conscious awareness would only receive 6.25 bytes of that picture. So imagine if someone sent you a 1.4 megabyte picture and you only got 6 bytes out of the 1.4
Would it be super
million.
Blurry or what?
No,
or
you wouldn't get shit. It's just pixels, right? I mean,
a couple
nothing.
Pixels,
yeah. My point isn't that you would be able to do that. It wouldn't even send because your phone would go, I don't have the information to assemble this. It wouldn't even go. Yeah. So you got to remove all that reality. I'm just saying, if you think that we're getting a complete picture, what we're getting is 6 bytes of a 1,400,000 byte picture, right? So we're not sampling reality.
Right.
We're sampling a very small portion of objective reality.
Yeah.
And then as we're going to see, the blanks get filled in by subjective subconscious things, right? So how the fuck do we even know or decide what is going on? We'll get to that, but first let's continue looking at some other research scientists have done regarding the human brain and how it actually works. What's even weirder is some shit that was scientifically determined through experiments in the 1960s and 70s. 2 German neurophysiologists were attempting to estimate exactly how long it took the conscious mind to initiate a movement after the decision to move was made. They used the flexing of a finger. They'd have subjects come to a point where you're like, I'm going to flex my finger and flex it, kind of thing.
That's what gets disrupted from my dad with Parkinson's. The things that we take for granted,
those firings.
Telling his brain telling his hand to reach in his pocket.
Yeah, exactly.
We don't even think about it, how quickly that happens, and he has to attempt it several times before he can actually get it in his pocket.
Yeah, what was really weird with him too, at least early on, when it was starting to really manifest. If a pencil would roll off a table, he'd reach out and snatch it, instinctually, no problem. But if you said, pick up that pencil, It would took everything in him
Effort
to get his
to
hand
get his
on
brain
it, to grasp
to
it.
make
But
his hand grab it. Yeah,
it's
it's
very
interesting.
how our brain,
Yeah.
does that. What they found is kind of crazy to consider. As they tested subjects, they found the movement was always preceded by what they called readiness potential, which is a buildup of electrical activity which seems to indicate the brain preparing to carry out the action, right? You would expect that. Like, you're going to move, stuff starts happening, and then you're going to move, right? Consistently, this readiness potential was observed to occur 0.8 seconds before the finger flex. If we are moving concurrently with our decision to act, this seems kind of creepy and weird, right?
Wait, what?
So think about it. If I'm like moving my finger, I'm deciding and moving my finger.
Yeah.
What they found was while I'm doing that, the actual stuff that was happening to move my finger was happening almost a second earlier.
Yeah, well, I would expect that.
Well, not if you're making a decision and moving your finger. So you think that your brain is anticipating you deciding to move your. That's what I'm saying is.
Yeah, but
this is weird that you're totally down with this. This blew their minds. Listen to me.
Well,
Listen
I guess
to
I'm
me
just
explain
really
this.
smart.
You're not. No. You're not understanding this. You're not understanding this. They're going on the idea that you're going to make a decision to move, and then the readiness potential builds, and then you move and then your finger moves.
Okay.
Right. What they say is the readiness potential goes, and then people are moving their finger. And they're assuming like, well, they're deciding to move their finger after their brain already started the process of moving their finger. What the fuck is happening?
Oh, I misunderstood what you're saying.
See what I'm saying? The brain seemed to be initiating the movement before they even moved, before they decided, they thought.
Before they decided to move. So the potential to move was happening. Then the finger moved, and then the brain thought about moving?
Well, hold on. They didn't know that yet. Okay. All they knew, they were assuming that our finger moves concurrently with our decision to move our finger.
Okay.
That I'm going flex,
move.
and it's happening at the same time.
Right.
So if that's occurring,
yeah,
but the stuff in my brain to move my finger is happening 0.8 seconds before that's happening, that's like precognition or something. Like it knew I was going to move my finger before I even knew I was going to move my finger. You see what I'm saying? The natural question they had was, so when did they decide to move their finger, though? This is important because the data so far leads to ideas of precognition or something. Their brains seem to be doing things before they decided to do them. And to them, that seemed like impossible. How could that be, right? So the question is, when did they decide to move their finger? We need more data. We need to understand this, right? More weirdness was identified, though, through some very advanced and highly thought-out experiments by a scientist named Benjamin Libet in 1979. Still using the finger flexing, these studies employed components that allowed the scientists to determine the point of decision, adding that to the overall picture of what the fuck was going on. The results were super consistent and has led to some settled science around our cognitive processing. What he found was that the readiness potential consistently happened about 0.55 seconds before the finger flexed. However, he also demonstrated that the conscious decision to act occurred 0.2 seconds before the actual movement. Think about that. That means that conscious decision to act happens about 0.35 seconds after our brains has started the mechanism to perform the act. So again, this is really weird because, okay, hold on. They didn't know any of this yet. So all they're seeing is shit happening in the brain, like the brain firing up. And then supposedly their decision to act. So there was something going on, obviously, that they couldn't quite figure out, right? So scientists everywhere said, what the actual fuck? Some, though this fact has been demonstrated over and over through experimentation and confirmation, refuse to accept the results because of the implication and controversy. It sounded like magic. Like scientists at this time were like, I refuse to believe that this is true. Okay? So that's what I'm saying is like, you got to put yourself in their frame of mind. They didn't know what you know. All they knew was this conflicts with physical reality to us. It was based off assumptions of how the human brain works, right?
Yeah.
That's the problem, is that we were assuming some things. And so this looked like magic or like something that people could skew and turn into something, you know? However, today, after huge advancements in brain research and science, it is accepted that this demonstrates a half-second delay between an actual experience and our conscious awareness of it even happening. We are literally never living in the now. In fact, it is completely impossible for humans. So stop telling me to do so. All we can ever do is live a half second late. Ever.
Live in the half second.
Yeah, so what they found was everything we're experiencing, our conscious experience of it is a half second after the fact.
Yeah.
Okay. It feels like we're living in real time, but we're slipped a half second in the past, right? Which is so weird to think about, that we're all like kind of late all the time.
Chasing ourselves.
like, why didn't you answer me? Half second delayed, man. I just found out. Apparently, we decide to move.
Be here in the half second.
Yeah, exactly. The power of a half second ago. Fuck you, Eckhart Tolle. You're wrong. Get with the program. Apparently, we decide to move, which triggers the buildup of readiness potential in our brains. However, our awareness of our decision to move doesn't happen until about a half second later. Like, it's our brain deciding, and then we don't understand that we decided till a half second later. And then shit happens, right? Yeah. Followed by like about 0.2 of a second, and then the action happens because it takes time for this.
Which I can see where this is going.
You can?
Oh, yeah.
I don't even know where it's going.
We're talking about rational thinking.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Then you're telling me that my movement and stuff happens before I think. So then I make up.
No, it's not that your movement. It's not that. It's not that your movement happens before you think.
No, not before I think. I mean, I mean that the decision to move happens before I think that.
No, it's not even that really. It's that because our conscious awareness of what we're doing is so slow and so limited in its processing, we don't form that picture, that thought, until a half second after we've done it.
Right.
That's even weirder.
No, what I'm saying is your rational thought comes after the act has already, and the potential to do the action, right? So rational thought comes after, which tells us we aren't rational beings. We make rational stories after we've already done the action.
Yeah, no, that's totally true.
I mean, not after done the action, but started the.
Right. I would say these experiments pointed to a more physiological kind of understanding, in like electrical understanding, that it applies to what you're saying totally, right? Is that we're never... our brains are limited in those limitations. This was purely for motor functions and not necessarily like coming up with reasons for anything, but it's still, you're right. It signifies that
something is forming the action other than our rational mind is what the point of what we're talking about.
Right, and our brains aren't this supercomputer like figuring out the truth and stuff. It's like just operating. Super strange to consider, but what about the tens of millions of bits of information coming in that cannot possibly be handed over to our conscious mind due to its processing limitations, right? Like, what do we do with, there's 11 megabits coming in and 50 of those make it? What happens to the rest of the shit, right? Some suggested it was simply thrown out or discarded, borrowing from analogies between computers and our brain. Remember, this is a time when we're inventing computers and we're like, it's just like our brain. And I know when files aren't needed, I trash that, And so they thought, well, maybe the brain's just like chucking it, right? However, other observed phenomena such as subliminal priming and optical illusions seem to render this as highly unlikely, right? If you think about like subliminal priming, what that is when there's this ability that we can kind of, by sending visual or auditory or other sensational kind of things that are quick enough that it's so fast that the human brain can't process it cognitively, and yet we can still control your behavior based off of that. That means that shit's not getting thrown out, right? If we can use it later to affect your actions after we put it in you, when you weren't aware of it, then obviously your brain's not throwing away this information because it's still in there, right? We can fuck with you. And same thing with optical illusions, right? We'll find out here in a little bit through an example, but optical illusions are kind of your brain's ability to make sense of something that's confusing based off of this experiential, subjective information it's stored, right? And if it didn't have any of that to pull from, optical illusions wouldn't work, right? Because, we would just see whatever.
What it is, yeah.
Yeah. A commonly held hypothesis that continues to be studied suggests that all of the information coming in is stored far below our awareness. As our feeble conscious computers deal with the small amount of data they can, it seems our subjective experiences from the past, along with other subconscious information, is being used to determine our conscious conclusions. We quite literally are all living in our own reality, put together by our own brains, born out of all kinds of shit we have collected in our subconscious throughout our lives. Much of this is a common experience thanks to consistency we have created around us, but each person's actual perception is uniquely their own in actuality. None of us think alike.
Nope.
Because none of us have the same subconscious pool of information that is being pulled from to fill in the blanks on the actual conscious stuff that we can process, or the stuff that can be handed to our conscious brain from this influx of info, right? Going back to our 1.4 megabyte picture metaphor, even though your conscious mind only receives a little over 6 bytes of the overall picture your senses are taking in around you, it appears that the rendering of reality we experience is a process of filling in these blanks based on our subconscious mind. Our experiences, memories, programming, all of that shit make up the vast majority of the conscious picture we experience, with very little objective information in the mix at all, right? Very little of the stuff that we're actually seeing, hearing, experiencing is going into our brain's actual rendering of the picture that shows up in our conscious experience, right? It's mostly pulling from subconscious stuff with a dash of the stuff that's going on.
Yeah, which is why hypnotherapy can change behavior so
yeah, because it deals with the subconscious. It's also why things like tarot and astrology and these other things, that if you deal with them appropriately and look at them as something that's coming out from inside of you instead of coming in from outside of you, it can be very valuable as exposing some of the stuff that's down there. Not for the purpose of telling your future, but to understand your cycle, your subconscious kind of stuff that's going on.
Which would tell you something about your future if you understood your subconscious better.
Sure, because of our ability to go like, well, this leads to this.
Because I'm going to end up creating. I'm going to end up creating this reality.
Yeah.
Based on what's inside my fucking head.
And I would say that's largely based off of the pattern recognition. We'll talk about this much more next episode. We'll talk a lot about our pattern recognition. But the same thing we share with these chimpanzees, even though they can do it much faster because of their evolutionary needs, that same pattern, that same ability for us to determine patterns can go like, well, if I act like this and this and this, this is going to be a result based upon experience and all these subconscious things and, all that shit. Which is super fascinating. Like,
totally, I fucking love the mind.
How does that not make us more interesting than magical creatures who know everything?
Yeah,
I don't know.
No.
For example, there is a famous optical illusion called the Mueller-Lyer illusion, named for the German psychologist who developed it. You've probably seen it before on some BuzzFeed article that says if you can solve 8 out of 10 of these puzzles, you're probably going to marry Harry Styles dressed as your inner Disney princess or some bullshit like that. God, I hate those. But there's a lot of those. A lot of the optical illusion things or whatever. Okay. It consists of 2 vertical line segments side by side. The one on the left has what looks like double arrowheads on each end, right? With the points, so like the angles are in, right? The other looks as if you bent the arrowhead lines out so that the angles look like Y's on each end, right? You've seen this, like arrowheads and Y's, right? Most people have seen this optical illusion. The illusion created causes our brains to see the line with the outward pointing angles as much longer than the other line, even though they are identical in length.
Yeah.
Most people who look at this, in fact, almost everyone who looks at this, especially in the West, we'll talk about here, sees the line on the right as longer. But when you overlay them, they're identical in size. What the fuck is going on? So if we think our brains are seeing reality and feeding us truth, they're obviously not, because empirical truth says both of these lines are the same. And our brain creates this reality that says, nope, the one on the right's longer.
Yeah.
There have been a lot of theories around what our brains are doing here. One potential explanation comes from a researcher in the 1960s who surmised that our conscious understanding was being significantly informed by experience stored in the subconscious mind. He suggested that our brains see these shapes and, based on experience, perceive the arrowhead shape, the one with the arrowheads kind of, as in the outside corner of a wall, and the other as an internal corner of a wall. Imagine those drawings you did in high school art class where you had to draw perspective lines to accurately represent a corner, right? And you did different ones depending on if it's the outside of a building, say, or the inside of a wall inside or whatever, right? Comparing visual information of these lines seems to be how our brains concoct a 3D image out of 2D visual info coming in. Notice how easy it is to tell when things are off, right? Like you go to your high school kids' art class and you see these perspectives, and the ones you're like, you can just tell our brains have a hard time with these like things that don't match up with our experience of what perspective looks like, right? So drawing upon experience that objects further away appear smaller, our brains make adjustments, causing the internal corner shape to appear larger, our brains correcting for the depth in this misperceiving. So this guy's theory was that what happens is our brains don't know what to do with these two, but it recognizes it from experience through the subconscious subjective information that these look like corners of walls. And because the way our brain builds a 3D image is by this comparison of like, and these conclusions that this thing's farther away, it makes that one look bigger, right? To kind of correct. So in other words, you're not seeing at all what's there. You're seeing what your brain is presenting you, and your brain had to pull from experience in order to create that image, right? There is evidence that he was onto something when, using the same illusion, people from a variety of cultural backgrounds and contexts were evaluated. What they found was that people who did not live in rectilinear buildings, like buildings with sharp corners like that, were far less susceptible to the illusion. Their brain didn't have that experience. Their houses were domes or round or whatever, and they don't have this right angle kind of thing. And so their brains responded differently, and they didn't see that. They just saw them as two different shapes, right? And they wouldn't have seen the lines as different sizes, right? Most current researchers believe this answer is not completely correct. However, they do think it has the correct source identified. They agree that our brain uses subjective experiences in creating the conscious reality we have. However, the current take is that it has more to do with our brains picking up depth clues and misinterpreting the drawing as a 3D image, making perspective adjustments in response. Kind of sounds like the same fucking thing, right?
Yeah.
But these are scientists, right? So they're being real pedantic. But they are saying it is more general than something specific like square-cornered buildings. What they're saying is, just in general, our brain sees these lines as perspective lines and tries to make its best guess at what's going on based off of information stored in our subconscious that. For instance, while arranged vertically, people who are not familiar with square-cornered walls may be less susceptible, their brains do the same thing when they arrange the shapes in other ways that fool their brains with 3D perspective clues that are familiar to their experience. So like they would take them and put them down so it looked like a rug next to where the wall meets a floor, which is a kind of this right angle thing. And they would see the illusion then. So it seems like it's pulling from experiences that you have, and your brain is seeking to build a 3D image. And that particular arrangement of lines fools it into thinking that it's a 3D image. And so it goes, well, this must be closer, so I need to make it bigger. And so it makes that line look longer. It's fucking crazy, actually. But that means we are, in a sense, all living in a reality crafted by a tiny amount of information we become aware of, and a shit ton of stuff we never do. Colored through misperceptions, subjective experience, emotions, fears, social anxieties, memories stored below our awareness, and other limbic system functions, right? All this stuff that we can't actually form words around at all is actually forming most of our conscious experience. In other words, none of us have figured reality out because we simply are never really experience it objectively. everything is filtered, curated, skewed, and arranged through a huge bias.
Yeah.
You. Okay? Everything is filtered through
one
me.
big bias.
You. Exactly. If we are going to consider ourselves rational, we then have to consider what kind of evidence exists that suggests this is our default natural way of engaging the world. When we do look, what we find is that pretty much everything we have figured out about how our brains work has rendered reason and rationality as wishful thinking at best. We are processing most of the information out there below our awareness, only employing our supposedly rational powers onto a minuscule amount of it. The rest is buried in darkness, subjective, emotional, connected to memories and experiences, and it is this part of the mind that holds the majority of sway over our thinking, decision-making, opinions, beliefs, politics, and perspectives. We aren't rational, we are rationalizers, able to concoct and slap on a number of good-sounding reasons for why we do what we do, when in reality we are simply trying to catch up and make sense of what is happening, getting our reasoning from information that we are totally blind to, constantly seeking to provide meaning to the picture of reality our brains have manufactured, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, are we super smart? We're constantly preoccupied with trying to figure what's happening. So that's where we're going to leave off in this episode. Next episode, we'll have some fun as we take a look at some other interesting and irrational features of our brain's evolutionary development. We have a whole set of cognitive strategies working to keep us alive and connected to other humans. The problem is, it is working to do so in a world according to about 32,000 BC, resulting in the highly confused and erratic lives we experience today in our 21st century future world. So, I mean, I think that's interesting that we do movies where we're like, imagine this foreign world where we go where we wouldn't understand what's going on. That's us. That is us at a biological evolutionary level. Our brain does a great job of fooling us into thinking that we understand what's going on and that we're like, you know, kind of got our handle on shit, but we're really not. We're really, there really is a lot of complexity and strangeness and things that operate totally different than we think that our brains operate. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that to say that we're not smart or capable of rationale or anything like that, but it helps us if we can understand this, then, you know, what we have right now is a bunch of people trusting their brains on what is true.
Well,
and they're lunatics.
I was thinking, like, we just need to, be in awareness that we don't know and we're not certain about. Like, we can talk about what we're perceiving and bounce it off other people and try to hear what they're perceiving and know that, like, it's not locked down.
Yeah. And as we'll see next week, I mean, we'll go through like some biases and some of the things that we figured out through study, through sociological. These aren't guesses. These are things we've been able to demonstrate, repeat, you know, through different studies and tests. And what we'll find is our minds are not operating under the auspices of like finding the truth. Mm-hmm. That is not what our brains are keyed to. Mm-hmm. And I think we get messed up with that because we think our brains are going to lead us to the truth.
Yeah.
They operated to work for a totally different purpose, and largely that purpose was to connect us to a social group that our survival depended on. Mm-hmm. And so when we don't understand that, you know, if we don't, like when I read something, what I've had to learn to do is go, I'm biased. Mm-hmm. I know there's a bunch of shit in my brain. Mm-hmm. Like the search for truth is a fight. It's not a natural state. It is battling stuff that your brain is literally like launching against you to keep you from doing that because it thinks unsettling the social connection will be your death because it thinks it's 32,000 BCE. I mean, it doesn't think that, but I mean, like, let's personify it. It's kind of like thinking that. So knowing that can help us filter out. I mean, you look at a world right now captivated by just fantasy, and you think, how do people believe this? Well, we're going to talk about next week how people believe this. It's because our brain doesn't care about truth. It cares about other things.
Well, okay, so that is interesting that we were in a social group and then we decided, what led us to break away and change or seek a different truth and then lose that social connection. Like that's.
And it was hard.
Yeah.
And there were forces in our brains working against us to fight against that. And that
But we did it.
We did it, and it was under a lot of duress and stress.
Yeah,
and
no,
anxiety
it was.
and
No,
pain
it was
and brutality.
seriously.
As our brains literally waged war against us.
But what would lead us away? What would lead us to do that?
Well, I mean, then you have to lay on the complexity of just this life and our experience. And of course, like, I don't know. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Because if we're seeking to have connection, that's our main goal. But we broke connection.
Yeah, that's one thing we maybe never will be able to answer as humans is why we do what we do. Mm-hmm. All we can maybe understand is why we do what we do with what we do. Does that make sense?
Wait,
what? Like we do shit. Why do we respond the way we do shit? Because it seems like we're just going to do shit. Like that just is, people are doing shit, and it's like, so what do we do with the shit that we do? Yeah, being a human is a very complex thing. And we turn it into a simple. Yeah. I know, but I mean, sometimes I feel like I watch these nature shows. They're like, look at this fascinating creature. I'm like, oh my god, we're like equally right, but we tend to hold this place of like we're this observer observing reality, instead of no, we're just fucking tiny sliver of we're getting.
Well, we talk about being the witness and the observer, like we are higher minded and see and know. But that's interesting.
I mean, imagine if, like, say, dolphins could write and what they would write. Like we're able to communicate in a way that's unique, which allows us to leave this record of our amazing thoughts. And so I think that plays in a lot to our like thinking of superiority, as there are some things that tricks we've learned that have allowed us to do some pretty amazing things. And you think about how that's changed the world, communication and I mean, drastically.
Talking to people that we do not see.
Yeah. And then we find out, communication ought to whip up a violent mob. Like we have all of that. And so anyway, I'm glad. Thanks for listening, and don't trust your brain, as you can tell now. And remember, if anyone ever tells you, just be in your body, man. You're like, fuck you. My body did stuff a half second ago, and I'm just now becoming aware of it, so it can't happen. So leave me alone. They're like, get out of your head. Where else? I mean, what am I supposed to be? My ankle? My brain's in my head. All right.
Okay.
See you next week.